The autumn rain drummed against the tall windows of Thornfield Manor, casting dancing shadows across the marble floors of the grand entrance hall. Lady Rosemary Pemberton stood perfectly still as her lady's maid adjusted the emerald silk of her afternoon dress, her cornflower blue eyes fixed on the approaching figure of the estate's butler. "My lady," Jameson announced with his customary bow, "the sculptor has arrived for your sitting." Rosemary's heart fluttered, an involuntary response she had been experiencing with increasing frequency these past weeks since the Duke of Blackmore had commissioned a marble bust of his intended bride. The very thought of spending another afternoon in the presence of Mr. Adrian Sinclair filled her with an anticipation that was both thrilling and deeply improper. "Thank you, Jameson. Please escort Mr. Sinclair to the morning room," she replied, her voice steady despite the tremor she felt within. "I shall join him presently." As the butler's footsteps echoed down the corridor, Rosemary caught her reflection in the ornate mirror that dominated the entrance hall. Her golden hair was arranged in perfect ringlets, her complexion porcelain pale from a lifetime of careful protection from the sun, her figure corseted into the fashionable silhouette that society demanded. She was, by all accounts, the perfect nobleman's bride, beautiful, well-bred, and utterly compliant. Yet beneath this pristine exterior, her heart harbored secrets that would scandalize the very foundations of her world. The morning room had been transformed into an artist's studio for the duration of Mr. Sinclair's commission. Natural light streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the clay model that would serve as the foundation for the marble bust. Tools of the sculptor's trade lay scattered across a cloth-covered table, and the scent of wet clay mingled with the faint aroma of turpentine and linseed oil. Adrian Sinclair stood with his back to the door, his dark hair slightly disheveled from his work, his white shirt-sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms marked with the honest labor of his craft. At 29, he possessed the kind of masculine beauty that belonged more to the Renaissance master's paintings than to the drawing-rooms of Victorian society. When he turned at her entrance, his green eyes, the color of deep forest shadows, met hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Lady Pemberton," he said, offering a bow that was proper yet somehow managed to convey an intimacy that made her pulse quicken. "I trust one have not kept you waiting." "Not at all, Mr. Sinclair," she replied, moving to her designated position beside the window. "I hope the light continues to suit your purposes despite the weather." "The light is perfect," he said, though his gaze lingered on her face rather than the window. "Though I confess, my lady, that I find myself increasingly challenged by this commission." Something in his tone made her look at him sharply. "Challenged, sir? Have I been an unsatisfactory subject?" A slow smile played at the corners of his mouth, a smile that held secrets and promises that made her cheeks warm. "Quite the contrary. The challenge lies not in capturing your beauty, but in doing justice to the complexity I see beneath it." Their eyes met across the room, and in that moment the careful boundaries of propriety seemed to dissolve like morning mist. Rosemary felt exposed, as if this man, this common-born artist, could see straight through to her very soul. "I'm not certain I understand your meaning," she said, though the slight tremor in her voice suggested otherwise. Adrian moved closer, ostensibly to adjust the angle of her chin, but when his fingers brushed against her skin, the touch sent an electric shock through her entire being. "I think you do, my lady. There is a fire in you that no amount of social training can extinguish. It shows in the way you hold your head when you think no one is watching, in the flash of independence in your eyes when you speak of your charitable works, in the way your fingers drum against your skirts when you're forced to discuss your upcoming nuptials." Rosemary stepped back, her breathing shallow. "Mr. Sinclair, you forget yourself. And your place." "Do I?" He followed her step, maintaining the intimate distance between them. "Or perhaps, for once in my life, I am exactly where I belong." The words hung between them like a challenge, fraught with meaning and possibility. Rosemary knew she should rebuke him, should call for Jameson, should end this dangerous game before it truly began. Instead, she found herself drawn to his passion, to the way he looked at her as if she were a rare work of art rather than a commodity to be traded between noble houses. "You speak of things you cannot possibly understand," she whispered, though her voice lacked conviction. "I am betrothed to His Grace. The arrangements have been made. The contracts signed." "Contracts," Adrian repeated, his voice heavy with disdain. "As if love were a business transaction. As if the heart could be bought and sold like shares in a railway company." "Love is a luxury I cannot afford," she said, but even as the words left her lips, she wondered if she truly believed them. "Cannot? Or will not?" He reached out as if to touch her face, then let his hand drop to his side. "Tell me, my lady, when you wake in the morning, is it the Duke's face you long to see? When you walk in your gardens, do you find yourself composing letters to him in your mind? When you hear a piece of music that moves you, do you wish he were there to share it?" Each question struck her like a physical blow, because she knew the answers, and they terrified her. The Duke of Blackmore was 57 years old, widowed twice, with a reputation for coldness that extended beyond mere social reserve. Their engagement had been arranged by her father to settle debts and secure political alliances. She had accepted it as her duty, as countless women of her station had done before her. But standing here in the morning light with this passionate, impossible man, duty felt like a prison sentence. "What you suggest is unthinkable," she said, though her voice was barely above a whisper. "The scandal would destroy us both." "Would it?" Adrian stepped closer still, until she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Or would it set us free?" Before she could respond, the sound of carriage wheels on gravel outside made them both freeze. Rosemary flew to the window, her heart hammering as she recognized the Duke's black carriage approaching the front entrance. "He's here," she gasped, whirling around to face Adrian. "The Duke, he's here for tea. He wasn't expected until tomorrow." Adrian's expression shifted instantly from lover to professional artisan. "Where can I—" "The servants' stairs," she said quickly, her mind racing. "Down the corridor, past the pantry. Jameson will show you out through the kitchen garden." But as he gathered his tools with swift efficiency, Adrian paused and looked at her with such intensity that she felt branded by his gaze. "This conversation is not finished, Rosemary." The sound of her Christian name on his lips, spoken with such intimate familiarity, sent another shock through her system. Before she could respond, he was gone, disappearing through the servants' door just as Jameson appeared at the main entrance. "Your Grace has arrived, my lady," the butler announced. "Shall I show him to the drawing-room?" "Yes, of course," Rosemary managed, smoothing her skirts and checking her reflection in the window-glass. "And please ensure that the morning-room is restored to its usual state." She had barely composed herself when the Duke of Blackmore entered the drawing-room. Tall and imposing, with silver hair and pale gray eyes, he commanded attention through sheer presence alone. His face was handsome in an austere way, but it was the kind of beauty carved from marble, cold and unyielding. "My dear Rosemary," he said, offering her a perfunctory kiss on the hand. "I trust you are well." "Perfectly well, Your Grace. Though I must confess surprise at your early arrival. I found myself with an unexpected free afternoon and thought to visit my intended." His eyes scanned the room with the systematic thoroughness of a man accustomed to identifying threats and opportunities. "I trust the sculptor's work progresses satisfactorily?" "Indeed. Mr. Sinclair appears quite skilled at his craft." "Sinclair?" the Duke repeated, as if filing the name away for future reference. "I am unfamiliar with his work. How came you to recommend him?" Rosemary's throat felt suddenly dry. "I believe it was Lady Worthington who suggested him. She mentioned his talent for capturing true likeness. It was a lie, of course. Adrian had come recommended by the Royal Academy, where his work was gaining recognition despite his humble origins. But she could hardly explain that she had spent considerable time researching sculptors, looking for someone whose artistry might provide a respite from the suffocating predictability of her engagement. Ah, Lady Worthington. Her taste is generally reliable. The Duke settled into his chair with the air of a man making himself comfortable in his own home. I look forward to seeing the finished piece. A lasting tribute to your beauty will be a fine addition to the gallery at Blackmore Castle. The casual possessiveness in his tone made her skin crawl. She was to be another acquisition for his collection, as precious and ultimately as lifeless as the paintings and statuary that adorned his walls. Their tea passed in polite conversation about estate matters, social obligations, and wedding preparations. The Duke spoke of their future with the same dispassionate efficiency he might use to discuss crop rotations or livestock breeding. There was no warmth, no affection, no recognition of her as anything more than a necessary component in the continuation of his bloodline. When he finally took his leave, Rosemary felt as though she could breathe properly for the first time in hours. But her relief was short-lived, replaced by a growing awareness of the choice that lay before her. On one side stood duty, respectability, and the security that came with accepting her predetermined role. On the other lay the unknown, dangerous, scandalous, and utterly compelling. That night, as her maid helped her prepare for bed, Rosemary found herself staring out her bedroom window toward the village below. Somewhere in those winding streets was a small studio where Adrian Sinclair worked by candlelight, his skilled hands shaping clay into beauty. The thought of those same hands touching her skin made her shiver with longing. She dismissed her maid earlier than usual and sat before her dressing-table, studying her reflection by lamplight. Her nightgown was pristine white linen, buttoned to her throat and falling in modest folds to her ankles. Her hair hung loose about her shoulders in golden waves that caught the flickering light. She looked like the perfect picture of maiden virtue, yet she felt anything but virtuous. A soft tap at her window made her start. Heart-pounding, she moved to the glass and peered into the darkness. There, on the narrow ledge that ran beneath her second-floor window, crouched a familiar figure. With trembling hands, she unlatched the window and drew back as Adrian slipped inside, bringing with him the scent of night air and the faint aroma of clay that seemed to cling to everything he touched. "Have you lost your mind?" she whispered, though she made no move to send him away. "If anyone should see—" "No one saw me," he assured her, his voice low and urgent. "I know these grounds well enough. I've been watching, waiting for your lamp to be lit." Watching! The thought that he had been observing her house, learning its rhythms and secrets, sent another thrill through her. "I had to see you," he said simply. "What passed between us this afternoon, I cannot simply pretend it didn't happen." She wrapped her arms around herself, acutely aware of her state of undress. "Nothing happened this afternoon. Nothing that cannot be forgotten. Look at me and say that again." Against her better judgment, she met his eyes. In the lamplight, they seemed to burn with an inner fire that made her feel as though she was standing too close to a forge. "I cannot," she admitted in a voice so soft it was barely audible. Adrian moved closer, and she could see the tension in every line of his body, the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides as if he were fighting the urge to reach for her. "When I work," he said, "I try to capture not just the surface beauty of my subject, but the essence beneath. With you, I find myself sculpting not just your features, but your dreams, your longings, your secret self. Tell me, Rosemary, what does your secret self desire?" The use of her name, spoken here in her private chambers with such intimate tenderness, nearly undid her completely. She found herself swaying toward him like a flower turning toward sunlight. "I desire—" she began, then stopped, unable to voice the truth that burned in her heart. "Tell me," he urged, reaching out to touch her face with infinite gentleness. "Trust me with your truth." "I desire to be seen," she whispered. "Truly seen, not as a symbol or a prize or a duty to be fulfilled, but as myself. I desire to matter to someone, to be chosen rather than assigned. I desire. She took a shuddering breath. I desire to be loved. The words hung between them like a prayer, and when Adrian stepped forward to take her in his arms, it felt as natural and inevitable as breathing. His lips found hers in a kiss that was gentle at first, then deeper as she melted against him, her hands finding their way to the strong column of his neck, her fingers threading through his dark hair. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, and Rosemary felt as though the world had shifted on its axis. "Come away with me," Adrian whispered against her temple. "Tomorrow, tonight, I don't care when. Just come away with me, and I'll spend my life showing you how precious you are, how worthy of love." For a moment she allowed herself to imagine it, a small cottage somewhere far from London society, where she could wake each morning to Adrian's smile, where she could watch him work, where they could build a life based on love rather than obligation. The vision was so compelling it made her chest ache with longing. But reality crashed back like a cold wave, bringing with it the weight of consequences she could not ignore. "I cannot," she said, pulling away from his embrace. "You ask me to give up everything, my family, my position, my very identity. I would be cast out, ruined. And you, your reputation, your career." "I don't care about any of that." "But I do," she said, tears beginning to flow down her cheeks. "I care about the scandal that would touch my father, my sisters. I care about the life you've built for yourself, the recognition you've earned. I won't be the cause of your downfall." Adrian cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "Then what are we to do? How can I return to my studio tomorrow and pretend that I don't love you with every fiber of my being? How can I sculpt your likeness for another man when all I want is to hold you in my arms forever?" The anguish in his voice nearly broke her resolve. She covered his hands with her own, memorizing the feel of his calloused fingers against her skin. "We must be careful," she heard herself saying. "We must be discreet. I cannot give you everything, Adrian, but perhaps I can give you something." Hope flickered in his eyes. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I care for you more than is wise or proper. I'm saying that when I'm with you, I feel alive in a way I never have before. I'm saying that I don't know how to walk away from you, even though I know I should." He kissed her again, softer this time, with a tenderness that spoke of gratitude and understanding. "Then we'll find a way," he murmured. "Somehow we'll find a way to be together, even if it must be in secret." As he prepared to leave the way he had come, slipping back out into the night like a shadow, Rosemary caught his hand. "Adrian," she said, her voice catching on his name. "When you asked if I would be your muse, the answer is yes. In whatever way I can, for as long as I can, yes." The smile that transformed his face was worth every risk, every danger that lay ahead. As she watched him disappear into the darkness, Rosemary pressed her fingers to her lips, still feeling the warmth of his kiss. She knew that what lay ahead would test every ounce of courage she possessed, but for the first time in her life she was choosing her own path. The next morning dawned gray and misty, perfectly matching the uncertainty that clouded Rosemary's thoughts. She had slept little, her mind churning with the implications of what had passed between her and Adrian. In the harsh light of day, their midnight encounter seemed like something from a dream, impossible, dangerous, and utterly necessary to her soul. She was picking at her breakfast when Jameson appeared with the Morning Post. Among the usual collection of social invitations and business correspondence was a letter that made her heart skip, addressed in a hand she now recognized, though she had seen it only once before on the note that had accompanied a book of poetry left discreetly in the morning-room. "Will there be anything else, my lady?" Jameson inquired. "No, thank you." "And Jameson?" "I'm not to be disturbed this morning. I have correspondence to attend to." Once alone, Rosemary broke the wax seal with trembling fingers and unfolded the single sheet of paper. Adrian's handwriting was bold and confident, matching the man himself. My dearest Rosemary, if you are reading this, then I have not dreamed our midnight conversation, and you have not turned me away despite the impossibility of our situation. I find myself in the peculiar position of being grateful for such small mercies. I write to inform you that I must travel to London for several days to attend to business matters and to collect materials for your sculpture. The separation, brief though it may be, feels like an eternity stretching before me. I had not realized how completely you have captured my thoughts until faced with the prospect of not seeing you, even in the formal circumstances of our professional relationship. During my absence, I beg you to remember what you said to me last night. Remember that you are worthy of being truly seen, truly valued, truly loved. Do not let the cold voices of duty convince you otherwise. I have left something for you in our usual place, a small token to remind you that someone in this world sees your true worth. Until I return. A.S. Rosemary read the letter 3 times before the full meaning penetrated her consciousness. Their usual place, what could he mean? They had no established meeting spot, no secret location where tokens might be exchanged. Unless... She rose quickly and made her way to the morning room. At first glance, everything appeared normal. The space had been restored to its typical arrangement, with no sign that it had ever served as an artist's studio. But as she moved closer to the window where she had posed for countless hours, she noticed something that made her breath catch. Tucked behind the heavy velvet curtain, where it would be invisible to casual observation, was a small wrapped bundle. Her hands shook as she retrieved it and unwrapped the soft cloth to reveal its contents. Inside was a miniature sculpture, no larger than her palm, carved from what appeared to be ivory. It depicted a woman in classical drapery, her face turned skyward, her arms stretched out as if embracing the wind itself. The craftsmanship was exquisite, every fold of fabric, every strand of hair rendered with masterful precision. But it was the expression on the woman's face that took Rosemary's breath away. Here was joy personified, freedom given form, the very essence of a soul unbound by earthly constraints. Beneath the sculpture was a small card with a single line written in Adrian's distinctive hand, "As I see you, as you truly are." Tears blurred her vision as she cradled the tiny masterpiece. No one had ever given her a gift that spoke so directly to her heart, that captured not what she appeared to be but what she longed to become. The woman in the sculpture was everything Rosemary had never dared to be, unrestrained, authentic, gloriously alive. She was so absorbed in studying the carving that she didn't hear the footsteps in the corridor until it was too late. The morning-room door opened, and her father, Lord Pemberton, entered with his usual brisk efficiency. "Rosemary, there you are. I've been looking." He stopped short when he saw what she held in her hands. "What is that?" Thinking quickly, she closed her fingers around the sculpture, praying he hadn't gotten a clear view of it. "Nothing of consequence, Papa. A small trinket Lady Worthington gave me." But her father's eyes had sharpened with suspicion. "Let me see it. Really, it's nothing. Let me see it, Rosemary." She had no choice but to place the sculpture in his outstretched palm. Lord Pemberton examined it with the eye of a man well versed in art and antiquities, turning it over in his hands with growing displeasure. "This is no trinket," he said flatly. "This is a work of considerable skill and artistry. Where did you really acquire it?" Rosemary's mouth went dry. Her father was no fool. He would see through any lie she attempted to construct. It was a gift." "From whom?" "I cannot say." "Cannot? Or will not?" His voice carried the steel that had made him one of Parliament's most formidable debaters. "Rosemary, you are betrothed to one of the most powerful men in England. Any gift you receive, particularly one of this intimate nature, reflects not only on you but on this family's honor. I ask you again, who gave you this sculpture?" The words "intimate nature" hit her like a physical blow. Looking at the sculpture through her father's eyes, She could see how it might be interpreted. A beautiful woman in flowing robes, her face ecstatic, her pose suggestive of sensual abandon. What had seemed like artistic brilliance to her would appear as something far more scandalous to others. "I cannot tell you," she whispered, knowing that her refusal would only confirm his suspicions. Lord Pemberton's face darkened. "You cannot, or you dare not. Rosemary, if you have formed an inappropriate attachment." "I have done nothing to bring shame upon this family," she said, finding strength in the truth of that statement, if not in its complete honesty. "Nothing yet, perhaps. But this—" he held up the sculpture. "This speaks of intimate knowledge, of an artist who has studied his subject with more than professional interest. Tell me, daughter, has someone been taking liberties with your person?" The accusation hung in the air like a sword. Rosemary knew that anything she said now would be weighed and measured, that her father's sharp legal mind would parse every word for hidden meaning. "My virtue remains intact, Papa. I have conducted myself with the propriety befitting my station." It was true, in the strictest sense. Adrian had kissed her, held her, but their physical intimacy had gone no further. Yet even as she spoke the words, she knew they were inadequate, that the emotional intimacy she shared with Adrian was in many ways more compromising than any physical transgression might have been. Lord Pemberton studied her face for a long moment, then pocketed the sculpture. "This conversation is not finished. In the meantime, I think it best that the sculptor's commission be terminated. I'll send word that his services are no longer required." "Papa, no." The words burst from her lips before she could stop them. The Duke specifically requested that the sculpture be completed. "Surely you wouldn't disappoint His Grace." It was a calculated risk, using the Duke's authority to protect Adrian's position, but it was the only argument that might carry weight with her father. Lord Pemberton's political aspirations were closely tied to his relationship with Blackmore, and he would not lightly jeopardize such a powerful alliance. After a moment's consideration, he nodded grudgingly. "Very well. The commission will continue. But I will be present for all future sittings. There will be no further opportunity for inappropriate exchanges." As her father left the morning-room, taking with him the precious sculpture that had been Adrian's gift, Rosemary sank into a chair with shaking knees. She had managed to preserve Adrian's commission, but at the cost of any privacy they might have enjoyed. How could they continue their dangerous courtship under her father's watchful eye? Yet even as despair threatened to overwhelm her, she remembered Adrian's words from the night before. "Somehow, we'll find a way to be together, even if it must be in secret." Their love might have to be conducted in shadows and stolen moments, but it would not be extinguished by the surveillance of disapproving fathers. The days that followed passed with agonizing slowness. True to his word, Lord Pemberton installed himself in the morning-room whenever the sculptor worked, his presence as cold and forbidding as a stone guardian. Adrian, to his credit, maintained perfect professional decorum during these supervised sessions, but Rosemary could feel the tension radiating from him like heat from a forge. Their only communication came through glances, a look of longing here, a subtle smile there, the briefest meeting of eyes when her father's attention was elsewhere. It was torture of the most exquisite kind, to be so close to the man she loved yet unable to touch him, speak freely to him, or acknowledge the passion that burned between them. On the third day of this enforced propriety, salvation arrived in an unexpected form. Lady Worthington, her mother's oldest friend and one of society's most influential hostesses, paid a morning call that would change everything. "Margaret, my dear," she said to Lady Pemberton over tea, "I'm hosting a small soirée tomorrow evening, nothing elaborate, just a gathering for those interested in the arts. I had hoped that dear Rosemary might attend. After all, once she's married to Blackmore, she'll have precious little opportunity for such cultural pursuits." Lady Pemberton looked pleased at the invitation. "How thoughtful of you, Charlotte. I'm sure Rosemary would be delighted." "Wonderful. I've invited several artists to display their work, painters, poets, a few musicians. I believe there's even a sculptor coming who's been gaining quite a reputation. Someone named Sinclair, I think." Rosemary's teacup rattled against its saucer as her hands began to tremble. Lady Worthington noticed the slight disturbance and smiled kindly. "My dear, you seem excited by the prospect. Do you have an interest in sculpture?" "Some small interest, yes," Rosemary managed, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Then you'll find Mr. Sinclair's work fascinating. I'm told he has a particular gift for capturing the inner essence of his subjects. Most sculptors merely reproduce the surface. He reveals the soul." That evening, as Rosemary's maid helped her select a gown for the following night's soirée, she could barely contain her excitement. After days of enforced separation, she would finally have the opportunity to see Adrian again, to speak with him, perhaps even to steal a few precious moments alone. She chose her dress with unusual care, a creation of deep blue silk that complemented her eyes and hair, cut fashionably low at the shoulders but not so low as to invite censure. If she was to see Adrian among company, she wanted to look her absolute best. The night of Lady Worthington's soirée was crisp and clear, with stars visible between the London smoke. Rosemary arrived with her parents, her stomach fluttering with anticipation and nerves. The house was ablaze with light, and through the windows she could see elegantly dressed figures moving about in animated conversation. Lady Worthington's drawing rooms had been transformed into exhibition spaces, with paintings displayed on easels and small sculptures arranged on pedestals. The atmosphere was one of cultured refinement, with guests moving from one artwork to another while engaged in discussions of technique and interpretation. Rosemary found herself searching every corner of the room for a familiar figure, but Adrian was nowhere to be seen. As the evening progressed and she began to fear he might not come, she heard a voice behind her that made her heart leap. "I believe this piece might interest you, my lady." She turned to find Adrian standing beside a small display of sculptures, looking devastatingly handsome in his evening clothes. His dark hair was properly styled, his cravat perfectly tied, but his eyes held the same intensity that had captivated her from their first meeting. "Mr. Sinclair," she said, fighting to keep her voice level. "How delightful to see you again." "The pleasure is entirely mine," he replied, offering her a bow that was perhaps a shade deeper than strict propriety required. "I trust you have been well during my absence?" "Quite well, thank you." "And your business in London was successful?" "Very successful. I was able to acquire some materials that I believe will enhance the final sculpture considerably." Their conversation was perfectly proper, exactly what might be expected between an artist and his patron. But beneath the surface pleasantries, an entirely different dialogue was taking place, one conducted through meaningful glances and carefully chosen words that held double meanings. "Perhaps," Adrian said, "you would like to see some of my other work? I have several pieces displayed in the adjoining room." Rosemary glanced around to locate her parents. They were deep in conversation with Lord and Lady Ashford, her father no doubt discussing some parliamentary matter. "I would be delighted," she said. The adjoining room was smaller and less crowded, with only a handful of guests examining the displayed artworks. Adrian led her to a corner where several of his pieces were arranged, each one demonstrating his remarkable skill and artistic vision. "This one is magnificent," Rosemary said, genuinely admiring a marble figure of a dancer caught in mid-movement. "The way you've captured the flow of motion in stone, it's breathtaking." "Thank you. But I must confess, it pales in comparison to my most recent inspiration." His voice dropped lower, meant for her ears alone. "Since meeting my current subject, I find myself seeing beauty everywhere, in ways I never noticed before." Heat rose in her cheeks at his words. "Mr. Sinclair, you flatter me. I speak only truth." He moved closer, ostensibly to point out some detail in the sculpture, but close enough that she could catch his familiar scent. "Tell me, have you given any more thought to our previous conversation?" "I have thought of little else," she admitted in a whisper. "And your conclusion?" Before she could answer, the sound of approaching footsteps made them both turn. Lady Worthington appeared, beaming with hostess satisfaction. "I see you found our talented Mr. Sinclair, my dear. Isn't his work extraordinary?" "Indeed," Rosemary replied, grateful that her voice remained steady. "I was just admiring this dancer. The emotion in her face is so vivid. Ah, yes, that's one of my favorites. Mr. Sinclair, you must tell dear Rosemary about your philosophy of art. I find it quite fascinating." Adrian's eyes met Rosemary's briefly before he turned his attention to Lady Worthington. "I believe, my lady, that the greatest art comes from the deepest truth. A sculptor, or any artist, must look beyond the surface to find the essence of their subject. They must capture not just what is visible, but what is hidden, the dreams, the longings, the secret self that most never see." His words were clearly meant for Rosemary, and she felt them like a caress. Lady Worthington nodded approvingly, unaware of the undercurrent of meaning flowing between her guests. "How poetic! And tell me, do you find this philosophy applicable to your current commission? I understand you're creating a bust for the Duke of Blackmore." "The Duke has excellent taste in his choice of subject," Adrian replied diplomatically. "I find Lady Pemberton a most inspiring model." At that moment, Lord Pemberton appeared in the doorway, his eyes immediately finding his daughter. "Rosemary, your mother is looking for you. She wishes to introduce you to Lady Ashford's niece." The interruption was clearly no coincidence. Her father had been keeping watch, ready to intervene at the first sign of improper conversation. As they returned to the main drawing-room, Rosemary felt Adrian's eyes following her, a connection maintained across the crowded space despite the physical separation. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of proper conversations and social niceties, but Rosemary's awareness remained focused on Adrian's presence in the room. She could feel him watching her, could sense his attention like a warm touch against her skin. When he finally took his leave, their eyes met across the room one last time, and in that glance she saw both promise and determination. The ride home was conducted in relative silence, but as they alighted from the carriage, her father drew her aside. "I trust you enjoyed the evening," he said, his tone deceptively casual. "Very much, Papa. Lady Worthington is a wonderful hostess." "Indeed. And her guests were educational." Rosemary met his gaze steadily, recognizing the trap he was laying. "I learned a great deal about various artistic techniques. Mr. Sinclair's philosophy of art was particularly enlightening." "I'm sure it was." His voice carried a warning that was unmistakable. "Rosemary, I hope you understand that your behavior this evening, while outwardly proper, did not escape my notice. You would do well to remember that you are promised to another man, and that your actions reflect not only on yourself but on this entire family." "I have done nothing improper, Papa." "Perhaps not in deed, but in thought?" "In desire." His eyes searched her face with uncomfortable intensity. "I may be old, daughter, but I am not blind. I see the way you look at this sculptor, and the way he looks at you. Such attachments are dangerous for a woman in your position." Rosemary lifted her chin with what dignity she could muster. "Mr. Sinclair is an artist commissioned by my betrothed. Nothing more. See that it remains so." He turned toward the house, then paused. "The Duke has written to inform us that he will be returning from his estate in Yorkshire earlier than expected. He wishes to see the progress on your portrait and to discuss final preparations for the wedding. He arrives Monday next." The words hit her like a physical blow. Monday was only 5 days away, and once the Duke returned, her opportunities to see Adrian would become even more limited. The walls of her predetermined future seemed to be closing in around her with each passing day. That night, sleep eluded her entirely. She paced her room like a caged creature, her mind churning with thoughts of Adrian, of the Duke, of the impossible situation in which she found herself. Near dawn, exhaustion finally claimed her, and she fell into a restless sleep filled with dreams of strong hands shaping clay and green eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. She woke to find a note slipped under her door, written in the careful script of one of the upstairs maids. "My lady, the gentleman artist asks that you meet him in the rose garden at the old pavilion this afternoon at 3 o'clock, if you are able. He says to tell you it concerns the final details of your portrait and is most urgent." Rosemary's heart hammered as she read the words. The old pavilion had been built by her grandfather in a romantic style, nestled deep within the estate's rose garden where it was hidden from view of the main house by carefully planted hedgerows. In summer it was a favorite retreat, but now, in late autumn with the roses dormant, it would be completely private. The wisdom of such a meeting was questionable at best, dangerous at worst. If they were discovered, the scandal would be immediate and complete. Yet as the morning hours crawled by, she found her resolve weakening. The thought of seeing Adrian alone, of being able to speak freely without her father's watchful presence, proved impossible to resist. At 2:30, she donned her warmest cloak and made her way through the gardens toward the pavilion. The day was gray and cold, with a sharp wind that made the bare branches of the rose bushes rattle like skeletal fingers. Her breath came in visible puffs as she walked, and she pulled her cloak tighter against the chill. The pavilion appeared before her like something from a fairy tale, its white columns and classical proportions lending it an air of romantic mystery. Adrian was already there, standing with his back to her as he gazed out over the dormant garden. At the sound of her footsteps on the gravel path, he turned, and the sight of his face made her forget the cold entirely. Rosemary. Her name on his lips was like a prayer, spoken with such reverence that it made her chest tight with emotion. "You shouldn't have asked me to come here," she said, though she made no move to leave. "If we're seen, we won't be. I've been watching the house, learning the patterns of the servants. No one comes this way in the afternoons." He moved toward her, his eyes drinking in her appearance as if he were memorizing every detail. "I had to see you, truly see you, without the constraints of your father's presence." The pavilion provided some shelter from the wind, and they stood facing each other in the circular space, the air between them crackling with unspoken longing. "My father suspects," she said quietly. "He knows something has changed." "And what has changed, Rosemary? Tell me." She closed her eyes, struggling to find words for emotions that seemed too vast for language. "Everything. Since you came into my life, everything has changed. I wake each morning thinking of you. I go to sleep with your voice in my ears. When I walk in these gardens, I imagine you beside me, showing me how you see the world through an artist's eyes." When she opened her eyes, Adrian was closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his green irises. "Do you know what torment it is," he said softly, "to sculpt your likeness while knowing it will grace another man's home? To capture your beauty in marble while knowing that he will possess not just your image, but your person?" "Adrian, please." "No, let me finish." His hands came up to frame her face, his touch gentle despite the intensity in his voice. "I love you, Rosemary. Not just your beauty, though God knows you are beautiful beyond measure. I love your intelligence, your kindness, the way you light up when you speak of your charity work. I love the flash of rebellion in your eyes when you think no one is looking, and the way you pretend to be proper while your heart yearns for freedom." Tears spilled down her cheeks at his words. "You make it sound so simple." "Love is simple. It's everything else that's complicated." His thumbs brushed away her tears with infinite tenderness. "Come away with me, Rosemary. Tonight, tomorrow, I don't care when. We'll go to Italy, to France, anywhere you like. I have money saved, commissions waiting. We can build a life together." The offer hung between them like a golden thread, leading toward a future she could barely dare to imagine. For a moment she let herself picture it, waking up in Adrian's arms in some sun-drenched villa, watching him work while she read poetry in a garden filled with olive trees, being loved and cherished for who she truly was rather than what she represented. But reality intruded like a cold wind, bringing with it the weight of consequences she could not ignore. "My father would disown me," she whispered. "My sisters would suffer for my scandal. And you, what of your reputation, your career? The scandal would follow us wherever we went. I would rather live in scandal with you than in respectability without you. But I could not bear to be the cause of your ruin. You have worked too hard, come too far from your humble beginnings to throw it all away for me." Adrian's expression grew fierce. "You are not throwing away anything. You would be choosing love over convention, happiness over duty. There is no shame in that choice. Isn't there?" She pulled back from his touch, wrapping her arms around herself. "I was raised to believe that duty comes before personal desires, that the good of the family outweighs the wants of the individual. To abandon everything I've been taught, everyone who depends on me." "What of what you owe to yourself?" he demanded. "What of your own happiness, your own heart? Perhaps some people are not meant for happiness. Perhaps some of us are meant to serve a higher purpose. And what purpose is served by your misery? What noble end is achieved by chaining yourself to a man who sees you as nothing more than a broodmare for his heirs?" The crude words made her flinch, partly because they stung and partly because they rang with uncomfortable truth. The Duke had made no secret of his expectations regarding their marriage. She would provide him with sons to continue his bloodline and serve as a beautiful ornament for his social gatherings. Love, affection, even basic companionship were not part of the arrangement. "You speak of things you cannot understand," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "Nobility comes with responsibilities. Nobility comes with privileges that you refuse to claim." Adrian moved closer again, his presence overwhelming in the small space of the pavilion. "You have the privilege of choice, Rosemary. You have the privilege of saying no to a future that will slowly kill everything beautiful and alive within you." His words struck her like physical blows, and she found herself swaying under their impact. He caught her arms to steady her, and suddenly they were in each other's embrace again, clinging together like survivors of a shipwreck. "I'm frightened," she whispered against his chest. "I'm frightened of what I feel for you, of what you're asking me to risk. I've never made a decision based purely on what I wanted rather than what was expected of me." "Then let this be your first." He tilted her chin up so she was forced to meet his eyes. "Let yourself want something, Rosemary. Let yourself reach for happiness." Before she could respond, he lowered his lips to hers in a kiss that was deeper and more urgent than their first. This time there was desperation in his touch, as if he were trying to pour all his love and longing into this single moment of connection. Rosemary felt herself melting against him, her body responding to his with an intensity that shocked her. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard, and she could feel the thundering of his heart against her chest. "Will you at least consider it?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Will you think about what I've offered?" She nodded, not trusting her voice to remain steady. "I will think about it. The Duke returns Monday. That gives us 3 days to decide our future." He cupped her face in his hands one more time, as if memorizing her features. 3 days to choose between the life you've been given and the life you could have." As they prepared to leave the pavilion separately, Adrian first, then Rosemary several minutes later, he turned back to her with an expression of such longing that it took her breath away. "Remember what I told you the first day we met," he said. "Remember that you are worthy of being truly loved, truly seen. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." The walk back to the house felt like a journey through a dream. Rosemary's lips still tingled from Adrian's kiss, and her mind reeled with the magnitude of the choice before her. 3 days to decide between duty and desire, between the known and the unknown, between the woman she had been raised to be and the woman she longed to become. That evening, she sat at her writing desk for hours, staring at a blank sheet of paper as she tried to organize her chaotic thoughts. What would happen if she chose love over duty? What would happen if she didn't? Both paths seemed fraught with danger, both promised their own forms of heartbreak. As the night grew late, she found herself writing not a letter but a list, 2 columns of potential consequences, one for staying and marrying the Duke, one for leaving with Adrian. The exercise was meant to bring clarity, but as the lists grew longer, she realized that no rational analysis could solve the dilemma she faced. This was not a problem that could be reasoned through. It was a choice that would have to come from the heart. The next morning brought a letter that changed everything. It arrived with a regular post, bearing the Duke's official seal, and its contents made Rosemary's blood run cold. My dear Rosemary, I write to inform you that I have decided to advance our wedding date. Due to certain political developments that require my immediate attention, I believe it would be best if our union were formalized sooner rather than later. I have taken the liberty of making arrangements for the ceremony to take place 1 week from Saturday, rather than the previously planned date in December. I trust this acceleration of our plans will not inconvenience you unduly. The guest list will necessarily be smaller, but I am certain your family will appreciate the intimacy of a more private celebration. I look forward to claiming you as my Duchess and beginning our life together as soon as propriety allows. Your devoted fiancé, Blackmore. The letter fluttered from her nerveless fingers to land on the breakfast table, where her mother immediately retrieved it with eager curiosity. "Oh, how exciting!" Lady Pemberton exclaimed after reading the contents. "Only 10 days to prepare, but what an honor that His Grace is so eager to make you his wife. We shall have to work day and night to ensure everything is perfect." 10 days. The number echoed in Rosemary's mind like a death knell. Her 3 days of decision-making had been reduced to hours. Whatever choice she was going to make, it would have to be made immediately. "Rosemary, dear, you've gone quite pale," her mother observed. "Are you not pleased with His Grace's eagerness?" Yes, of course. It's just rather sudden." "All the best romances are sudden, my dear. Your father and I were engaged for only 3 weeks before we married, and look how well that turned out." Rosemary managed a weak smile, though privately she wondered if her parents' marriage, polite, practical, and utterly devoid of passion, was truly something to be emulated. The rest of the morning was consumed by frantic wedding preparations. Dressmakers were summoned, menus planned, guest lists revised. In the midst of all this activity, Rosemary felt like a spectator at her own life, watching numbly as her future was arranged around her without her input or consent. It was nearly noon before she found an opportunity to slip away from the chaos and send word to Adrian. Using the same maid who had delivered his previous message, she sent a simple note, "The Pavilion. 2 o'clock. Urgent." The next 2 hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. When she finally reached the pavilion, Adrian was already there, pacing the small space like a caged panther. His face was tense with worry, and when he saw her expression, his worst fears were clearly confirmed. "What's happened?" he demanded without preamble. "The Duke has advanced our wedding date. We're to be married in 10 days. The color drained from Adrian's face. 10 days. He claims it's due to political considerations, but I suspect he's grown suspicious of our association. Perhaps my father warned him." For a long moment, Adrian said nothing, simply stared out at the gray November sky as if searching for answers in the clouds. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but firm. "Then you must decide. No. Today." Rosemary nodded, though the thought of making such a momentous choice filled her with terror. "I know. Look at me, Rosemary." When she met his eyes, she saw not pressure or demand, but infinite understanding and love. "I won't ask you again to come away with me. I've made my offer, and you know my heart. The choice must be yours, freely made, without coercion from anyone, including me." His nobility in this moment nearly broke her heart. Here was a man who could have pressured her, could have used her obvious attraction to him to sway her decision, yet he was stepping back to give her the freedom to choose. "If I stay," she said slowly, thinking aloud, "I will be safe, secure. My family's honor will be preserved, my sister's reputations protected. I will live in luxury, want for nothing material. And if you come with me? If I come with you, I will have love. I will have a partner who sees me, values me, cherishes the woman I truly am rather than the facade I present to society. I will have a chance at happiness, at a life lived authentically rather than performed for the approval of others." "Those are the choices," Adrian agreed quietly. "Security or love, duty or happiness. The question is, which can you live with, and which can you live without?" Rosemary closed her eyes, trying to imagine both futures stretching out before her. In one, she saw herself as the Duchess of Blackmore, presiding over elegant dinner parties, managing great estates, raising children who would carry on illustrious bloodlines. It was a life of privilege and respect, but also of emotional emptiness and spiritual death. In the other, she saw herself in a small cottage somewhere far from England, watching Adrian work in his studio, perhaps even learning to sculpt herself. She saw laughter and passion, intellectual companionship and deep abiding love. But she also saw poverty, ostracism, the constant fear of discovery and scandal. "I don't know if I'm brave enough," she whispered. "You are the bravest person I've ever known," Adrian said firmly. "You've spent 27 years living a life that wasn't truly your own, playing a role that was written for you by others. That takes a kind of courage most people never have to muster. Or perhaps it just takes cowardice. Perhaps I've been too afraid to claim my own life. Then claim it now." He took her hands in his touch warm and reassuring. "Whatever you decide, I will accept. If you choose the Duke, I will finish your portrait and disappear from your life forever. You need never see me again or be reminded of what we shared." The thought of never seeing Adrian again, of losing forever this man who had awakened her heart and soul, sent a sharp pain through her chest. "And if I choose you?" "If you choose me, I will spend every day of our life together showing you how precious you are, how worthy of love and happiness. It won't be easy. We'll face challenges, hardships, the constant weight of society's disapproval. But we'll face them together, and we'll create something beautiful from our love." The wind rattled the bare branches around the pavilion, and somewhere in the distance she could hear the sound of carriage wheels on gravel. Time was running out. "I need to know," she said suddenly. "I need to know what it would feel like to be truly free, just once in my life. Before I make my choice, I need to understand what I would be giving up." Adrian's eyes searched her face. "What are you asking of me?" "I'm asking you to show me. Here, now, in this moment. Show me what love feels like when there are no constraints, no expectations, no roles to play. Show me who I could be if I were brave enough to choose happiness." For a heartbeat, Adrian hesitated, and she could see him weighing the propriety of what she was asking against his understanding of what she needed. Then, with infinite tenderness, he drew her into his arms. This time, when he kissed her, it was with none of the desperate urgency of their previous embraces. Instead, his lips moved against hers with reverent slowness, as if he were worshipping at the altar of her mouth. His hands traced the line of her jaw, tangled in her hair, and she felt herself dissolving into the warmth and safety of his embrace. When they finally broke apart, Rosemary felt fundamentally changed, as if some essential part of herself had awakened for the first time. The woman who had entered this pavilion was not the same one who now stood in Adrian's arms, and there could be no going back to ignorance of what love could be. "Now I understand," she whispered against his chest. "Now I know what I've been missing." The sound of approaching voices made them both freeze. Through the hedgerows, they could hear her father's distinctive baritone and another voice she didn't immediately recognize. "We should inspect the rose garden," Lord Pemberton was saying. "His Grace mentioned that he particularly enjoys walking among the flowers." "The Duke," Rosemary breathed in panic. "He's arrived early." Adrian's arms tightened around her protectively. "The back path," he whispered urgently. "You can reach the house through the kitchen gardens without being seen." But as she prepared to leave, Rosemary turned back to him with suddenly blazing eyes. "I have my answer," she said, her voice ringing with newfound certainty. "I know what I choose." "Rosemary." "I choose love," she said firmly. "I choose happiness. I choose you." The joy that transformed Adrian's features was like watching the sun rise after the longest night. "Are you certain?" "I have never been more certain of anything in my life." She reached up to touch his face, memorizing the feel of his skin beneath her fingers. "I don't know how we'll manage it, but I refuse to spend the rest of my life wondering, what if? I refuse to marry the Duke knowing that I'm capable of this kind of love." "Then we leave tonight," Adrian said decisively. "I have a carriage, funds, everything we need. We'll go to Dover, then across to Calais. By the time they realize you're gone, we'll be safely on the continent." The voices were getting closer now, and they could see figures moving through the garden paths. With one last desperate kiss, Rosemary pulled away from Adrian's embrace and hurried toward the back path, her heart hammering with excitement and terror in equal measure. She reached the house just as the Duke's party emerged into the formal gardens, managing to slip through the servants' entrance and up the back stairs to her room without being detected. From her window, she could see Adrian's tall figure disappearing into the maze of hedgerows, and she pressed her fingers to the glass as if she could somehow reach across the distance to touch him one more time. Tonight, she thought. Tonight her real life would begin. The afternoon that followed was a masterpiece of deception. Rosemary greeted the Duke with perfect composure, accepted his kiss on her hand with gracious reserve, and participated in the discussions of wedding plans with apparent enthusiasm. All the while, her mind was racing with preparations for her escape. She would need to pack only essentials. Too much luggage would arouse suspicion. A few changes of clothes, her jewelry, which could be sold if necessary, her most treasured books. Everything else would have to be left behind, along with the life she had always known. As evening approached and the Duke prepared to return to his London residence, he drew her aside for a private moment. "My dear Rosemary," he said, his pale eyes studying her face with unsettling intensity, "you seem rather flushed this evening. I trust you are not taking ill." "Not at all, Your Grace. I believe it's merely the excitement of our approaching nuptials." "Indeed." His thin lips curved in what might have been a smile. "I confess, I am eager to formalize our union. You are a prize that many men would covet, and I find myself protective of my investments." The possessive undertone in his voice made her skin crawl, but she managed to maintain her serene expression. "You are too kind, Your Grace. Kindness has nothing to do with it. You are beautiful, well-bred, and will provide me with the sons I require. That is a practical matter, not a romantic one." He paused, his gaze sharpening. "I trust you understand that I expect absolute loyalty from my wife. Absolute fidelity. I am not a man who tolerates diversions." The threat was clear, and Rosemary wondered if somehow he suspected her feelings for Adrian. "Of course, Your Grace. I would never dream of bringing dishonor to your name. I'm certain you would not." He lifted her hand to his lips for a perfunctory kiss. "Until our wedding day, my dear. Sweet dreams." As his carriage disappeared into the gathering dusk, Rosemary felt a shiver of relief mixed with anticipation. In a few hours, she would be free of the Duke's cold presence forever. Dinner passed in a blur of conversation about wedding preparations, with her mother chattering excitedly about flowers and music while her father discussed financial arrangements with his usual businesslike efficiency. Rosemary participated when required, but her thoughts were entirely focused on the hours ahead. When she finally retired to her room, pleading fatigue, her heart was beating so fast she feared it might burst from her chest. Her maid helped her prepare for bed, chatting innocuously about the excitement of the approaching wedding, unaware that her mistress was planning to disappear into the night. Once alone, Rosemary sprang into action. She had hidden a small traveling bag in the back of her wardrobe, and she now packed it with swift efficiency. A few simple dresses that could be worn without a maid's assistance, undergarments, her warmest cloak, her jewelry box, and her most precious book, a volume of poetry that had been her mother's. Everything else would have to be abandoned. She changed from her nightgown into a practical traveling dress of dark blue wool, arranged her hair in a simple style that could be managed without assistance, and wrapped her warmest cloak around her shoulders. Then she sat by her window to wait for Adrian's signal. The clock on her mantel ticked toward midnight with agonizing slowness. Every creak of the settling house made her jump, every whisper of wind against the windows sounded like approaching footsteps. What if Adrian changed his mind? What if he decided that the risk was too great, that the scandal would destroy them both? But just as doubt began to creep into her mind, she saw a flicker of light in the gardens below, the brief flash of a lantern, extinguished almost immediately. Their agreed-upon signal. Moving as quietly as possible, Rosemary gathered her bag and crept to her bedroom door. The hallway beyond was dark and silent, with only the faint glow of a single lamp at the far end to guide her way. She had walked these corridors thousands of times, but tonight they seemed foreign and treacherous, full of shadows that might hide discovery. The servants' stairs were her best option for reaching the ground floor undetected. The narrow wooden steps creaked ominously under her weight, and she held her breath with each step, listening for any sign that her movement had been noticed. The kitchen was dark and quiet, smelling of the evening's dinner and the lingering warmth of the banked fires. She made her way carefully between the large tables and hanging pots, praying she wouldn't knock over anything in the darkness. The door to the kitchen garden opened with a soft click that sounded thunderously loud in the silence. Cool night air rushed in, carrying with it the scent of frost and dying leaves. Freedom was only steps away now. Adrian materialized out of the shadows like a dream made flesh, his face pale but determined in the moonlight. Without a word, he took her bag and led her toward the waiting carriage, which stood concealed behind a grove of trees at the edge of the estate. It wasn't until they were seated inside the carriage and it began to move that either of them dared to speak. "Are you all right?" Adrian asked, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm terrified," she admitted, "but I've never felt more alive." He reached for her hand in the darkness, and she clung to his fingers as if they were her lifeline. "There's no going back now." "I know." She turned to look out the window at Thornfield Manor, where a few windows still glowed with lamplight. Somewhere in that house, her parents slept peacefully, unaware that their eldest daughter was disappearing into the night with a man they barely knew. By morning, their world would be turned upside down, their carefully laid plans in ruins. The thought brought tears to her eyes, but also a strange sense of liberation. For the first time in her 27 years, she was choosing her own path, writing her own story rather than acting out a role written by others. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness of the carriage. "And I love you," Adrian replied, lifting their joined hands to his lips. "Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." The carriage rolled through the night toward Dover and the waiting ship that would carry them to France. Behind them lay everything they had ever known: family, friends, social position, security. Ahead lay the unknown, fraught with danger but bright with possibility. As the first rays of dawn began to streak the eastern sky, Rosemary Pemberton ceased to exist, replaced by a woman brave enough to choose love over duty, happiness over security, authenticity over performance. The sculptor had asked if she would be his muse, and in running away with him, she had discovered that she could be something even more precious. She could be herself.